Alrighty. Hey gang. Welcome back, you guys. Episode 27. Is that it? 27? Episode 27 of Stove Chat. Right on. Happy Wednesday, gang. How are you guys? Nice to see ya. Welcome. Glad you guys are here. Good to see everybody. Thanks for showing up, you guys. Hope you guys are having a great day. Having a good one here. I got some shades up on the window, and we're doing a little better with light, I think. Although it's it's still pretty bright in here. So bright that I look dark, even though I got a really bright light on my face. But yeah, hope you guys are doing good. Hope you guys are having a great beginning of fall here. Robin says it's getting chillier and chillier. And yes, it is. We're getting into that time of year, aren't we? Everyone's thinking about stoves. I'm definitely starting to hear from a lot more folks on the regular, on the daily these days. So I know we're getting there. So yeah, hey Mark, Doug, Belgian Gulch, glad you made it today. Clint, good to see you. Awesome that you're here, man. Thanks for being here. And Augustus, glad you made it back. I know that work can get in the way, can it? So, all right, I gotta move around and look around my stuff. Hey, Pete, you're here. All right. I got my camera right in front of the chat, so I kind of can look at you guys when I read your chats, but sometimes it obscures my view. So let's see, what are we going to talk about today? I got a couple business things, not really too businessy, but I just wanted to explain. I get a lot of comments, people going, why is there that intro with nothing going on? I watched for a minute and there was nothing, and I just wanted to let you guys know, I think you guys get it. I start that thing 2 minutes early so I can make sure that the stream goes smoothly. Usually, I mean, you guys have been here, so it's sort of a legacy of struggling with getting things to stream smoothly and just kind of make sure I get a good solid connection. So I apologize if that's a pain in the butt, but it does help me kind of get settled and know that everything's working before I dive in here. So yeah, Robin, I got some shades, getting fancy around this place. So yeah, so I've had a great week. I've heard from a lot of you folks and a lot of new builders and a lot of people looking for plans. And that reminds me, I should do my little spot. I want to do Augustus, thank you for putting me up to it. As you guys know, I sell stove plans for you guys to build these stoves from. You can find all the plans and more information at my site, walkerstoves.com. So go check it out, and that's what this is all about. We're here talking about stoves, so I can help you guys build the best stove that you can, and whether you're holding my plans or not. So if you're a plan holder, that's what we're here to talk about, is your builds, and even if you're not, I love just talking about stoves. So just getting that business stuff out of the way. I'm going to try and get better at that, so thanks for bearing with me, you guys. And let's move on. We got some great questions through email. I got some photos to go over. And I'm sure you guys have some questions as well. So why don't I start with a really good question from email, and then why don't we take some questions from you guys if you've got some, and get into some of those. So, but this one's pretty neat, and it shouldn't take very long. I wanted to go over it. So this is from our friend Tall Shadow. And this is sort of a spin-off from a Permies conversation that they were having. And he says, I'll just read it directly. He says, someone in the forums the other day spoke about using carbon fiber cloth held firm with water glass, sodium silicate, as a protective liner to a soft insulated core like CFB, IFB, or superwool. Wondering if you have tried this material. And it's a great question. It's a really interesting question to me. So there's a few parts of it that I'd like to break down. One is just the idea of using composites, composites being, a composition of different materials to gain the structural properties that you want. And then the other part of that question that I'd like to talk about is protection for the firebox, because I think we got two different things to talk about here. So first and foremost, composites in rocket stoves. So composites, the industry or the materials, I'm going to make some of this up, so I might be wrong, but composites, probably, I'm sure people have used that word forever, but it's come to mean essentially basic, I'm sure it has a lot of various meanings, but to me, I always identify it with sort of the fiberglass industry. Those were known as composites kind of since their beginning in the 30s or 20s, 30s, 40s, whatever it was, 30s and 40s, I think. And so they typically mean, a plastic type resin. It doesn't need to be plastic, but a resin that will harden, and then that's usually combined in a composite with a cloth material, and the composition of those two materials gives you really interesting structural material characteristics, right? The cloth, is really durable in tensile strength. It's hard to rip, to tear, to break apart this way. And as soon as you encapsulate that in the resin, it lends those properties to what now becomes a rigid material. So I won't go too far down that road, but just to kind of cover the basics of composites, that's usually what we're talking about. We're talking about a substrate, an underlying, usually a liquid to a solid type material, and a laminate that's in there. Not a laminate, but a layer of cloth, typically. So the question is, have you ever used this material? And so the question is, you guys are speaking about carbon fiber cloth in this question, but to be honest, I don't think that the carbon fiber cloth is really going to be significantly different in our use than any other mineral-based cloth, composite cloth. So fiberglass is silica. We use that in our stoves all the time. It'd be just fine. There's all kinds of stuff. You can go way far down this road, and I have in the snowboard world. There's mica and basalt and on and on and on. Flax is a popular one in the hippie composite world. So our permaculture folks might like flax. But at any rate, and actually another one that we use pretty regularly in concrete composite is burlap, because it doesn't need some of the temperature resistant characteristics. So that's another example of composite using concretes and cloths. And that's really common, right? You see that a lot. Like, actually, you could say that our standard concrete and steel mesh is a composite of the same ilk. So the question is, have you ever tried this material? And I would say, that really the question should be, have you ever tried a composite? Because I don't think the carbon fiber is going to make a difference, make or break. Now, carbon fiber has certain characteristics in composites that make it a little bit different, unique to regular fiberglass, silica-based fiberglass, or flax, or basalt, or any of the other ones. Carbon fiber tends to be really, really stiff, fairly brittle. It doesn't have very good compression strength. It has pretty good tensile strength, and it has a real unique rebound. And those are all things that matter to, like, tennis rackets and snowboards and stuff, but they don't matter much to us in rocket stoves. Now, what ceramic or carbon fiber does have is really good abrasion resistance in a composite. So that could be applicable in a rocket stove, but I don't really think it is, and I'll get into why that is. But they do use it as sheathing on the bottoms of boats that you might beach or things like that. So carbon fiber is really durable to abrasion. There's others that are more durable to abrasion. Actually, flax is a really good one for that. And Kevlar, of course. We're all really familiar with that. That's probably the ultimate abrasion-resistant composite cloth. I'm kind of really unpacking this question, aren't I? The real question is, do we use composites? And so that's something that we've used a lot in rocket stoves with varying success. My very first rocket stove videos with my 8-inch J-tube and my 8-inch riser that many of you have tried. I know Belgian Gulch, you've used my riser. And in those first videos, I did put chopped fiberglass strand in there in an effort to kind of keep things from cracking, or if they did crack, hold them together using that composite concept of, putting fibers in there. And that's, we're coming full circle, right? That's cob. Cob is composite. Cob is mud and stuff that's going to dry, but it would crack if you didn't have fiber in there, so you put straw in there. So these are all really common themes in our masonry construction composite. So let's break it down a little more. Carbon fiber cloth. I don't think you need to specifically use carbon fiber cloth. I don't think there's any advantage there in our applications, because you're not, in my opinion, going to be able to build a true composite that acts like a fiberglass composite, where it becomes really a monolithic structure and a homogeneous material. I believe that because of our cementitious nature of our substrate, I guess you'll call it. I'm not sure what the right word is for that, but of the cement, the fiberglass, the resin, whatever that's carrying that cloth. My thought is that you're still going to get that stuff. It's going to be brittle. We're not going to be able to overcome its real its low tensile strength, and it's going to crack with the thermal changes, and the cloth will hold it together. so it won't go any farther once it's cracked. So there's some, bulletproof stoves. Always learning. He's asking about Kevlar. So really, what I'm trying to get at here, I'm really just kind of wandering around in circles, and I apologize. I had to have somewhere to go with this. Basically, we use, and I think even Belgian Gulch did this, we use composite like around the barrel when we wrap it with cob. We put cob up there and wrap some fiberglass around it. Gives it that structural support and makes the whole thing monolithic. Inside your stove, I just don't see any reason to go to that trouble. I think ceramic fiberboard is lighter. You can just cut it to shape. If you don't want a square riser, you can do a 5-minute riser with a blanket inside of a flue pipe. I just see this whole pathway as sort of being a bunch of messing around to get you no significant advantages. Now that's for risers and cores outside of the firebox. The second part of the question was, could we use something like this as abrasion resistance in the firebox? And, that one, this one has a little bit of potential, I believe. Because, like I said, I do think it's going to crack, but I think the cloth would hold it together. I kind of think you'd just end up with like a big kind of crunchy sock in there. I don't think it would be a very good core liner for a few different reasons. Mostly just that, like I said, any of the concrete materials you're going to put in there, even if it was refractory, if you make it thin to hold that cloth in there, and that's the only reason you want to put cloth in there is if you're going to try and make it thin. And so if you make it thin to hold that cloth in there, it's just gonna be brittle and break. Even if it doesn't break apart, it'll crack. And if you make it thick, you don't need the cloth in there. So it doesn't make any sense really to me to go down that road. And lastly, those metal liners are really easy, simple, one and done. And I just don't see this kind of construction really being like, I don't think you'd slide your wood in there smoothly. I think you'd be banging on it. If it was this carbon fiber and it was loosely captured, it'd be like trying to stick your firewood into a jacket. Like it'd just bunch all around. So it's got to be part of that composite. I did see the images of some of the parts that the fellas made, and they were interesting, but they were very different in terms of what they were looking for. We're just looking for a liner inside of a constructed thing. They were looking for some real thin, light parts to make rocket engines. It's just a totally different goal, and frankly, I don't see it being useful. I'll just say it like that. That's not to say composite and cob isn't useful. It's very useful. It's useful in a lot of places. Anytime you have big, gaps to span or things to go over or around things to try and hold it onto, fiberglass in the cloth is really helpful. And actually, one of my favorite examples of composite is our friend Pat Amos up there in British Columbia, who's been using Scotch broom chopped up into strands as the fiber for his plaster and cob projects. And I just think those natural composites to me are really interesting, and I'm much more inclined to be interested in that direction than I am towards the carbon fiber. And I will say that fiberglass chop strand I put into my mix a long time ago, I didn't I do think it made a little difference, but I didn't find in the end that it probably was necessary. So I would actually probably just want to go away from all of these materials if I could to build my stoves. So there's the answer to that. I hope that was useful. It was sort of a long answer on a sort of random topic, but one of the things that we can cover here is we do get a lot of people seeking ways to continue to improve, and I think that's awesome. And so I love this discussion. I think it's really, really interesting. But again, at the end of the day, what we come back to is kind of like casting the cores. There's just a lot of labor involved, a lot of cost, equal dangers and risks, and I just don't see the upsides, to be honest, over our ceramic fiberboard simple builds or fire brick. So there's that. So let's get back to the chat here. And Clint has a question here. Clint says, clay sand mortar, a little in-depth about that. Lincoln 60 properties alternative here in Hawaii, black sand property, sharp sand. How fine should sand be? That's a hard question to answer, Clint. You definitely want sharp sand. Your Hawaiian, like beach sand isn't gonna work. I won't say it won't work. Again, I'll tell you what. This is gonna sound like a cop-out, but you've got the stuff right there. experiment. You know, like when you get your, I know you have to order the clay. I know you don't have clay, but you've got your black sand, so you can experiment with it, and you can compare that. I know you'll be able to get some mason sand over there as well. So I would say experiment and feel the difference for yourself, because I think you'll find that they're significantly different. And what I want to say, though, is that I do think you should experiment, because I built full stoves with some black river sand that I harvested from our local river, and it's incredible how much you can feel the difference with your hands when you're mixing the mortar and mixing that clay. And it becomes really apparent, like, as soon as you start building the stoves, how they stand up to brick stacking. You know, you'll find with the round sand you can only get a layer or two, and then it's mushing out and flowing out of your joints. So, but again, that's my sand. My sand was really round. Yours, I think, is probably really round because it's beach sand. But you've got black sand, which is lava, so it's probably kind of sharp. So I honestly don't know, Clint. I can't give you a real definitive answer, other than to say that just get your hands on some mason sand. Usually it's just silica sand, mason sand, contractor sand. If you just went to like your road crew, they'd probably have some of that type of sand. And maybe not in Hawaii now that I think about it, but usually that's where you'll find like masonry job sites and things like that. And just experiment, because I think you'll recognize the difference pretty quickly. And you will, it's not like the black sand wouldn't work. It probably will work. It just might be a little more difficult to work with. But it's probably worth playing with. So I do think you might experiment with it. But I also feel like if you can get, without too much expense or trouble, get yourself some silica sand, some contractor sand, mason sand, you'll be ahead of the game. And I learned that through my own process of experimentation, and it's pretty stark how much of a difference that sharp sand makes. Your bricks just stand up tall. You just really notice it. So your mortar will be a lot firmer at the same moisture level, because the pieces of sand interlock. So there's that answer. So Doug says, speaking of steel liners, do you just sit the liner on top of the secondary air channel? And do you think that the air channel still gets preheated? Yeah, Doug, I do. Yes to both of those. Although, certainly I do think that it's a bit of a compromise to the air channel. But keep in mind, we're talking really thin. The RA330 that I use, I think I bought 18 gauge. I'm going to recommend most people go to 12 gauge. Mine's holding up fine, but it's just a little wobbly. And I think that's going to transfer heat down into that secondary piece just fine. And to be honest with you, I think it takes quite a bit of time for the whole firebox to heat up to where we're transferring much heat down into that secondary air tube. But I think most of that preheating just comes actually in that vertical stub, because we get that thing like, on the cusp of deterioration, and so the air coming in is just like rapidly, increasing in heat. It may not get up to whatever the temperature is back there, 900 degrees, but it's certainly going to come in far, 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 far hotter than it, hit the end of the tube than it came in there. So I don't think that's much of a compromise. I don't think it's really worth agonizing over trying to, incorporate that secondary air tube inside. I think it's easier just to keep all those pieces modular and separate, so you can adjust as you go through your consumption cycles. I haven't really determined firebox liner whether it's a consumable. I'm of the mind that it's not. I'm of the mind that it's probably going to be a permanent piece. That RA330 seems to be holding up fine with no deterioration, but I do think it would be prudent to go through a couple more seasons before I really claim it as a permanent fix. So there's that. So Augustus says, would it work to encase your riserless core in aluminum like the J-tube in batchbox plans? Yeah, Augustus, it would. And I think, actually, I drew plans for those. I actually have plans for a full metal standalone cook stove using the riserless core. And I think they'd be wonderful. And they would work great. They just... I haven't personally had a use for it, and building those metal ones has just been a little outside of my financial means to build one on spec, as it were, and mostly because I I can do a half-assed job of metal work, but if I was going to build a nice, beautiful stove, I'd want to hire some of my metalworking friends and build spend some money and build a beautiful stove. But I do. I think that it would be awesome in a metal box. I think it'd be awesome with a glass top. And actually, if you go to the customer builds section of my site, you'll see there's a fella there who built a stove very similar to that in Portland. I think it's got a metal surround on his fireplace. And then also our very own David Swanson, who's here often participating, has an 8-inch riserless core in a metal box that he uses inside his fireplace as like a fireplace insert. So there's a lot of designs that you can spin off of the riserless in a metal box, and I think there's a ton of potential there, to be honest with you. Of course, the flip side is it's pretty easy to stack up bricks and put it in a brick box if you don't need to move it around. So that's kind of why the metal boxes are really nice, but a brick box sure is easy to put it in, and it builds a base for whatever's going on top. So you kind of, there you go. So let's see. Borat, nice to see you. Thanks for being here. Really enjoyed trading emails with you these last couple of weeks, my friend. So Borat says the batch rocket mass heater would be perfect for my space, but I would really miss the ability to brew a cup of tea on it. Would it be possible to include a small glass plate right above the core? Yeah, Borat, absolutely. Yes, very much yes. As a matter of fact, if you go back in this YouTube channel, my Bro Audio channel, and you go back to when I converted my 8-inch J-tube to a batch box in my big house, you'll note that I did put a glass top right on top of the firebox in the batch box, and I used that to cook on, and I did it all the time. And actually, when Peter Vandenberg and I built the first 8-inch batch box in Montana at Paul's place, we also used glass over the firebox to great effect. So yes, Borat, you absolutely can. You could do it a couple different ways. If you use like ceramic fiber board for the roof of your batch box, then you could just cut like a circle hole in it and put a little circular piece of glass and just have a little single burner. Or what we did was just put a whole piece of glass over the whole thing. Now that does probably affect the efficiency a little bit, but I don't think very much, because mostly what we're doing is trying to get our wood gas into the second stage, which is in the riser. And so I don't think that heat radiating off of the firebox right there is really a showstopper. Now, I'm a big fan of insulated fireboxes, so I'm always going to push to keep as much heat in the firebox as possible. But when you're making a compromise like that, you're doing it with an intent, and I think that's fine. So yeah, I think it'd be a great idea. I think you'd love it. I think it'd be really cool. And if you do it, let us know. I'd love to see it. So Clint says not beach sand from a quarry. Yeah, Clint, so that might work. I do know that black sand is, I was thinking, you guys have so many black sand beaches that's a different thing. But if it's black sand from a quarry and it's sharp lava sand, I bet you that would work awesome. Maybe you can find or get on the phone with a local mason. There must be people who do stonework over there, and maybe you can ask them if they have any tips about local materials. That's usually the best way to go. One thing about this masonry stuff that's really, really fun and really cool is that it changes everywhere you go, right? Because we all are going to use, masonry doesn't ship very well, so sand and the basic ingredients are usually specific to your locale, and so just a little bit of local questioning might get you a lot further down your path than I can do for you. So, but I do know that lava is sharp, so I would have guessed that lava sand would be great. So I'm going to scroll back up. You guys are jamming here, so let's see. This is awesome. So let's see, rocket mass heater, let's see. Okay, Clint says he bought, I'm sorry guys, I have to look around my camera. He bought the RA 330 12 gauge, 16.5 by 26, about $350. That's awesome info, Clint. Thank you for that. That's, I think it's a really reasonable price. That's going to be something that should last a lifetime in there. So Oregon Coast Green, man, we haven't seen you for a while, man. Nice to see you. Glad you're here. Thanks for showing up. Appreciate your company here. So Robin says, beautification. When bumping out a layer or two of exterior bricks an inch or so, is it best to just leave a small void between the interior and exterior bricks, or fill that area with something? Yeah, Robin, if it's in a place where there is an interior brick, like if it's, where the core is sitting, or if you're doing a double skin, or for whatever reason, ideally you'd want to fill that with mortar as you go. And the only reason for that is just because airspace is insulative space, and space filled with mortar that makes a solid connection will conduct, right? So if you can, you want to fill all those gaps with mortar as you go. And usually that's easiest to do from the top down. So you want to, fill layer by layer as you go. Don't leave it open gaps and try and hope you're going to get some down there, but just go do it as you go, layer by layer, and you don't need to agonize over it too much. But if you can, fill those voids. You might get a little stick once you drop some in there and kind of vibrate it down into the voids and get it to flow around, and that'll just basically what you're going to try and do is turn your multiple layer stove into a monolithic unit. That's kind of what our goal is. And that's sort of the opposite goal of a lot of double skin stoves. So don't do that if you're building a double skin stove, because they usually want a little separation for thermal expansion. But in our case, we're building our stoves kind of as one unit, hoping to move together and heat as one. And so ideally you'd fill those gaps, and that's the same like filling the holes in the bricks if you have cord bricks. So I hope that answered your question, Robin. And I love the idea of the bump outs. Thank you for following along with that. Most the people who do it usually do it far better than I do. I just have like the basic grasp. I can pass it on, but I love to see it come to life in the hands of all of you guys as end users, because they usually just come out gorgeous. And I need to excuse me. At some point here, when we get a slow day, I need to make I'm going to need to make an album of all of my customers' builds, so we can sit here and just look at all the different, we've been looking at build by build, but I'd like to just go over them all, finished one shot of each one, so we can look at some of the different concepts that come in to play in the builds that are, ostensibly the same. They just come out so varied. It's wonderful to see. They really show the personalities of the builders, and I just love that. So we'll do that sometime soon. So Mark, nice to see you. Mark says, away from topic, I saw Sawing with Sandy, and he had some wood chips, and it was said not to put too much together as it could heat up and spontaneous combust. What a great idea. Interesting. Not to put too much wood chips together. Yeah, you do, any big piles of wood, big piles of hay, straw, like that, you can get spontaneous combustion. And as a matter of fact, that's, that sun is just out to get us, isn't it? As a matter of fact, that's one of the, there's compost pile water heating systems as well, and sort of all of those things work on the same principle. So yeah, be careful piling stuff up like that. So Doug says, did the glass on the roof of the batch box stay pretty clean? And Doug, it cycles, so it'll get completely blacked over when you light the fire, and then once things get up to speed, it burns clear. And that's pretty common with most of the glass in our stoves, depending on the location, but that's usually how those cycles go. And it stayed, it didn't ever become permanently blackened. So yes, I think over time you could say it stayed clear, but it does blacken and clear. But anytime the fire's going good, it's crystal clear. So there's that. Borat, you're welcome for that answer. I hope it helped. Mark's talking about the sawdust pile or the compost pile, and he says a person could run water through it and put it through a heat exchanger and heat your house. And you certainly can, and that's actually exactly what I've seen those systems. Paul had one in Montana. It wasn't very effective, but that wasn't it wasn't a failure of the theory. It was just, in order for something like that to be effective, you need massive amounts of material. So this is the kind of thing that only makes sense for like a Christmas tree farm, or someone who's got an abundance of chipped material and can make massive piles. Then there's no reason in the world not to take advantage of that. And all you need to do is just run big loops of black poly tubing under, buried in your compost pile. Hopefully your compost pile is as big as a house, and away you go. So it's a really simple way of getting alternative heat energy, but it's it's only for people who have heavy equipment and a lot of materials, because on a small scale it doesn't do you really any good at all. You just get such a tiny amount of energy, and you need to replenish the composting material. It's not, it's simple, but it's not easy. Let's put it that way. So very cool stuff. So let's see. Mark says, is the bell method the best method? Mark, that's a really, 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 really tricky question, and I don't think there's a best method. I think in most instances, the bell makes the most sense. I mean, I think it uses the least material, it's the least amount of labor, it's really flexible in shape and design. They're very efficient. I could go on and on and on, but I've come around to be a real big fan of those, unless there's some real specific reason to do a flue run, cob buried system. I would choose those last. There are times when they make sense. If that's the material you have. If you don't want to buy bricks, you just have a lot of people, you get a lot of mud, cob flue run builds are great. You can still do cob bells, but you need something to support them, like my half barrels, some other structures. So if you're just going for simple, we got no materials, we want an awesome stove, cob flue run benches are great. Another time they work really well is when you want to go a long distance, because you can, basically a flue is just a really small bell. So you just can stretch it out really far. The downside is I don't think those long benches get very warm. You just don't have, very much transfer surface area. Whereas when the whole bench is a bell, you're transferring across the whole top, and then once that's hot, you start transferring down the sides. So, it's just big flue pipe as a bell is how I look at it. It's big, thick flue pipe. And so, I do think bells are better for most builds, but some people want a stove here and a 50-foot run down the whole side of their barn for a lot of people to hang out on, and in those cases a flue run's going to make more sense, because a bell you'll never do it. You won't get that far. And like I said, it still is a bell. In my opinion, it's not. I mean, at some point there is a flue run and a bell, and the flue runs are flowing, but it's not like that flue is full of gas and flowing. I think that those flues just flow across the top, so I think they still act a lot like bells. But anyways, I'm getting off in the weeds there. So hopefully that makes sense there. Let's see. Sally Mafari says, a cool Instagram page, the album of builds. That's a good idea, Sally Mafari. That is a good idea. And heat exchangers need safe pressure management. Person could run water through it. Oh, I see you guys are talking about those composting pile heat exchangers. Yeah, I think, the idea would be you just have it as an open system, Sally Mafari, and then you wouldn't need to do pressure management. You just have like a big tank at the end of a loop, or in a loop in that system, and the tank's open, and then a circ pump, and hopefully there'd never be a pressure problem. But yeah, water heat exchangers can be a big issue with pressure management. And Oregon Coast Green Man, great point. He says a bell is very efficient at extracting heat, and that is its biggest advantage from his perspective. And that's one of the things I agree 100%. I mean, bells are just, it's, people look at their big empty bench, and I still get this question. I got it yesterday. What should I fill that bench with? I don't have cob here. Should I fill it with pebbles? And it makes me smile, but I'm like, I know you think you should fill the pebbles, but just let's leave it a bell. And because you will get much more efficient heat extraction. That you get all that surface area, and it's all cold to start and trying to radiate out into your space. You can pull a lot of heat out of the exhaust gases with a bell. And you can change the shape and the size and the layout and the flow depending on how you run your flue pipes and chimney. They're just really, really flexible, and they're super efficient at extracting heat, and on top of being super efficient, they're very, very low resistance. They cannot really build up significant drag, and that a flue system can. You can just get friction drag from the length of the run. So A lot of things a bell does well. So Sally Mafari has a follow-up on Mark's last question. Does a long flue run want to be single wall tube for better heat transfer? I know bells are good at collecting, but do they give off the heat faster? I'm not 100% sure I'm clear on your question, Sally Mafari. What does it want to be a single wall tube for better heat transfer? I mean, yes, you definitely don't want it to be double wall or insulated, because all you're going to be doing with any insulation inside that flue run inside your bench or whatever is, if it's insulated, you're just passing that heat farther downstream. So the only reason you might want to do that is, like I said, you had a really, really long, which you are asking about, a long flue run. So maybe you have a really long flue run, and this part over here is close to the barrel and it's pretty warm, and way down there you're not getting enough heat. Then you might, insulate a little bit of the initial part of the run, and then run single wall at the end. So those are tuning things, but that's really, I don't think that's what you're asking. I think you're just asking, are they, bells can collect heat, but do they give off heat faster? And so, again, what I want you to think about is really just the skin. And I think maybe that's what you're asking about with the flue, is, if we build that bell out of steel, like if it's a metal drum, a 55-gallon drum, then they transfer heat super quick. So the transfer factor is a function of the material that you build the bell with. So in my case, I'm going like this because I'm trying to, picture bricks, and bricks are going to transfer through that material at the rate that the clay transfers the material, and however thickness your wall is, and that's your heat transfer. So it's not really a function of the bell as much as it's a function of the material. The bell is just the shape, and the shape is just pretty much a box. And so if that box were steel, which is like what David Swanson has on top of his 8-inch riserless core as a radiator, just a steel box over that riserless core, that's basically a steel bell. We call it a radiator because it radiates heat so effectively into the room. So to answer your question, Sally Mafari, flue run, bell, doesn't really matter. It's just all about the material. Now a flue run, generally, in terms of the whole build, transfers heat slower, because typically what you have is you have the small flue with small heat transfer surface area inside a whole lot of cob. Okay? So as opposed to bricks, with kind of like a ton of internal heat transfer surface area equal to the amount of heat transfer surface area outside. That's different than flue run. They have a little bit of heat transfer area inside because it's usually just on this top section. Remember, it's not probably putting much out around the sides. It's just transferring in this like third of the flue, so you've only got that much surface area to transfer, and then it's transferring that into your cob, which is then going to radiate it out through way more surface area. So that is a big part of why bells work better, because the internal transfer area matches the external. Very different than the flue runs. So hopefully that helped. I don't know if that's just makes things more confusing or if it helps, but it's some discussion on the topic anyway, so it gets us a little farther down the road. We can circle back around to that. I will come back to the questions here, but okay, yeah, Mark has to run to work, so great to catch you, Mark. Thanks for being here. Positive aspect, good to see you, Dan. Thanks for showing up, man. Good morning. how's your I guess you guys are heading into summer there. Darn, I want to be heading into summer. So cob bells, says Positive Aspect. I've seen videos of Donkey building cob bells and using sticks to make a temporary top to cob over. Yeah, and actually, you may have seen mine as well in one of my old outdoor videos. Early outdoor videos I used little, sticks, kind of rafters, to span the top of a bench, and I just left like 2-inch gaps, at no bigger than 2-inch gaps between each stick, and then I was able to span that with a cob that had some straw in it, and it worked great. So you certainly can build all cob bells. You definitely can do it. It's tricky if they're going to be of a certain size. At some point, the weight of, if you're trying to span a big bell top with just sticks and cob, the cob itself is really heavy, so you're sort of limited to how much you can span. But you can do it. And the other thing you can do is you can support the cob, use something inside as support, like we talked about sticks, but you could just use, well, like my half barrels, it's just thin steel, right? But they're just there as a form, once the cob is there, if you could pull that form out and the cob would hold its shape. You can't get it out. It's just, I'm just giving you the concept. But basically, if you want to build sort of an all cob bell, you could just put some thin steel over it and then build up pretty thick with cob. And after, at a certain point, you build up a little bit and let that set, and then you can build a little more and let that set. And at some point, the cob is carrying its own weight, and then you can start to really build on top of it. So there you go. So Belgian Gulch says solid cob and rock mass holds heat longer than a brick bell. And you know, Belgian Gulch, I would say yes. You're not incorrect, but that's only if you have the same size box, let's say, and one box is brick empty and one box is brick filled. The one that's filled is obviously going to have more mass, and it will hold heat for longer. You're absolutely right. And it will take, conversely, it will take a lot longer to heat up. But I do think that if you were just to build an all cob bench that was X wide and X tall and X long, and you were to build a brick hollow bench that was the same width, the same height, and the same length, I actually don't think that you'd be gaining any mass in the cob. I actually think that that brick bell might even have more mass. Of course, it depends on your cob and how much rock you put in there. But I think brick tends to be a lot denser than cob as a general rule. And so I think that that even in a similar sized piece, if one's all cob and one's all brick and the brick one's hollow and the cob one's solid, I don't think there's a huge discrepancy there in the mass. To be honest, I think we'd have to do the math. I think at some size volume the cob is going to win, but on the smaller benches there's not that much volume of cob. I think the bricks win. But I'm speculating a little bit. But I hope you understand. Basically, the main gist of that point is just that bricks are more dense than cob. They're also fired. I do think you can pack more into the same space with bricks. But I do concur that a big cob and rock mass in a big space is just a big dense mass, and heat moves through it slowly, so you can get long cycles. You have to heat them for a long time, and the heat comes out for a long time. So Oregon Coast Green Man says a big problem with bells is making a top that spans the total top surface. No reason a bell cannot have support towers inside to allow smaller plates of refractory to cover the whole top. So Oregon Coast Green Man, awesome point. Really, really, really important for anyone looking at building these bell systems. One of them, that's one of your biggest limiting factors, really. And it, like he said, it's not that limiting because you can use columns to support them. But it's a challenge to build big spans across big bells, and in particular, it's a challenge when it's in a really hot area. So those of you who bought my plans know that I have a great solution for that, and I'll share it with you guys. I've shared it a few times, but not with this specific conversation. And this is actually a really important builder's tip. And it's one that you'll see in all of my plans if you're a plan holder. But like I said, it's one that we haven't really talked much about because it's something that I, sort of developed to get over this issue of spanning big bells. And one of the biggest challenges with spanning bells is, like we talked about, the size, and it goes hand in hand with the materials challenge. And it wouldn't be that bad if you had to span this big box, but the problem is it's got to span this big box and it's got to handle these rapid and wide heat cycles. So you can't just cast a concrete lid. You can't put a wood board over it. There's a lot of things you can't use up there. And so it limits you to what you can use, and those things tend to be kind of brittle. Like a big refractory lid is just asking for a crack. So what's the answer? And so what I've done with all of my plans, which you guys will note if you've seen them, is that almost all of my bells incorporate a board, ceramic fiber board, over the top of the span. And what that does is that gives you protection for your top cap material, and it leaves you free to use materials that might otherwise not hold up. So now you have a 1-inch layer of ceramic fiber board spanning your whole bell. Now you can go ahead and cast a concrete top, ideally with some burlap or carbon fiber or Kevlar or something in there, so that if it does crack, it won't separate. It'll just get a hairline crack. So I like to cast thin concrete tops with burlap inside of them. And put those on top of ceramic fiberboard. Now, if that span is really big, one thing you can do, you can Oregon Coast said you can put pillars up inside, but you can also use like angle iron or I-beams, and you can put steel cross members across. Now you need to be careful because anytime you join that steel at the ends of your masonry box, you've got to leave it room to expand or it'll blow your box apart when it expands. So you need expansion joints, and you might want to wrap it in super wool, but then that can hold up that ceramic fiberboard, which then can hold up your backer board and tile, concrete, stone, whatever you want to use for tops. Now that we've got insulation, now we can use decorative stone, sandstone, flagstone. We can use things that might otherwise not hold up to the heat cycles, because now our heat cycles are tempered. So there's that. Let's see. Let me go back up here if I can. And Mark, I'd love to show you a detailed tour of my homestead. Someday we'll do that. That'd be fun. Robin says, I assume a taller bell bench would allow for more cooling. I'm sorry, I'm looking around my camera here. Would allow for more cooling of the gases before they exit, harnessing more heat. Yes, Robin. So the real thing to think about, and I've often sort of swept past this, but it's important when we're talking about bells, and it's really just the internal surface area of your bell. You're only really going to use the top and the sides at first to a certain point, and then depending on how big your stove is, how long you're burning, as you heat those up, your hot column is going to get pushed farther down. You're going to heat up farther and farther down the sides. So whether your bench is long, your top's going to heat up and not much down the sides, or tall and narrow, top will heat up and then it'll start pushing down. So the answer, it wasn't really a question, but you were saying taller would allow for more cooling. Not necessarily more cooling than a shorter one, but it would allow for more cooling than a shorter one of the same footprint, because you just have more internal surface area. So really that's the factor, is just how much internal masonry surface you're exposing to the hot gases. And the more surface there is in there, then the more heat extraction you're going to get out of it. So, these things, they're easy concepts to understand. What's hard is to put them, put them in, into practice in your build. And this is why we kind of just start with these designs that we know work, and then sort of, your job is to sort of tune as you learn how it works. And a lot of those bell heights and lengths and all that stuff, it's really flexible, and it's really just going to determine, how you burn is going to determine how they heat, and depending on time of year and season, all those things, it's going to change. And I'm not really getting anywhere with an answer. What I'm trying to say is that, you just want to keep in mind the surface area, the time. If you have small surface area, you're going to burn once and you're going to heat the whole thing up, and you can fire out and the heat's going to come out. If you have a lot of surface area, you're going to burn multiple burns. It's going to take more time to heat it all the way down, and then you'll get more time of heating out of it. So just those are ways you can vary the size and the length of the cycles of your thermal storage. And whether that's height or length doesn't really matter that much. So let's see. I'm having a hard time seeing that. I'm going to move my camera, you guys. This is just right in my way. Okay, let's see if that's better. Okay. Let's see. I'm getting all lost. You guys have been chatting it up. So, big problem with bells. Span, tour of the homestead. Oh, I was down, trying to get caught up. Sally Mafari says, Belgian Gulch, if I understand Matt, the heat absorption and radiation both can offset in open bell versus heavy cob benches. Yes, I think that's true. Towers in a bell can also provide more mass inside a bell. That's a great point, Oregon Coast Green Man, and we saw that in Positive Aspects build that we looked at last week. Great way to add more mass and thermal storage inside your build. Always Learning says thick refractory kiln shelves for a bell top. That's a great answer, or a great solution. Always Learning. Those would work very, very well. And I don't know how big they come, but hopefully, I think if you can find them in big sizes, then that might be the perfect answer. So Silent Mafari says, wouldn't refractory push more heat down the system instead of absorb and radiate? I'm not sure what we're talking about here, Silent Mafari. Maybe you're talking about the tops, but at any rate, refractory really is just the material that hardens under certain conditions that we use in our stoves. It can be, you can have insulated refractory or you can have dense refractory. And as a matter of fact, when you buy them in bagged form, they sell them to you with two properties. One is the temperature rating and one is the density. And so you could build high density refractory tops, which would radiate and be thermal battery, or you could build insulated low density refractory tops that would insulate and push heat farther downstream. So refractory is pretty flexible in that it gives you a whole host of options, and you can tune it to whatever you're trying to achieve there. So let's see. Speaking of plans, Oregon Coast Green Man asks, wonder if you have a package price to buy all of your currently available plans as a unit. I want to have them to offer solutions to customers and then be able to have them buy their own copy of the type they choose. I don't have anything set up like that, Oregon Coast Green, but I have done some deals like that with other folks. And if you want to reach out to me via email, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. We could come up with something that works for both of us, and I'm sure we could meet somewhere on that. I'd love to help you with that. I'm sure it'd be good for both of us. So. Always Learning says refractory mean it can better take and absorb heat without cracking. Exactly. It doesn't really indicate the insulative or non-insulative. That's exactly right. Always Learning. So Silent Mafari says, I suppose that would depend on the temperatures. I don't know that bells get over 250 degrees Fahrenheit. So exactly, Silent Mafari. It's all going to depend on what temperatures, and that's going to really depend on which part of the system we're talking about. So my brick batch and brick RMH both have that initial bell that's kind of right over the riser. So that is a really hot spot. So, I do make sure to use ceramic fiberboard there, and then once you've done that, then I feel comfortable using concrete up there. Refractory would be even better. You could probably even use refractory without the ceramic fiberboard, but I'd be cautious because coming out of that riser, it's just going to see really high temps really fast. So refractories, especially with a big span, it's really about the temperature change more than it's about the peak that they can sustain. That tears them up. It's the change that tears them up. So that's why the insulation board is a really good idea. It just makes sure that whole top cap changes temperature at the same time. So let me see if I can catch up here. I know I'm missing some of your guys' chats. I apologize. I'm trying to catch up, but I know I'm missing some of them. So Positive Aspect says thermal mass info, double brick, 6.2 hour lag time, mud brick, Adobe, 9.2 hour lag time, and I suppose it depends on the type of stone in the cob. That's great input, Positive Aspect. Thanks for that. He says if it's sedimentary, then less mass than igneous or metamorphic. Yes, that's a really good point. Is that we really want to look for, dense rocks, like, granite or something, as opposed to sedimentary rocks like sandstone or limestone just won't have that same density. So he says I used slate in cob recently, and that was really dense compared to brick. So that's really interesting to hear. Yeah, so I think in terms of density we go cob, right? Brick is like kind of man-made stone made out of clay, right? Like primitive stone, I'll say. Thousands of years old technology. And then rock, which is, depending on the rock, but typically, like you said, most igneous or metamorphic rock is going to be far more dense than brick even. And so those are great, it's a great little scale for your density. And that timing input is really interesting, Positive Aspect. 6.2 hour lag time for his double brick, 220 millimeters. So that's about 9 inches, a 9-inch thick masonry wall is about 6 hours lag time. But if it's mud brick adobe, so the same thickness, the same construction, but saying we just built these bricks ourselves out of adobes, which is roughly the same as a cob density, it's another third again in time to transfer that heat. So it's just going to show you that it's less conductive, a little more insulative, and I believe less dense when you're dealing with cob. So, so there's that. So let's see if I can catch up here. Let's see. Inner surfaces of the top of a bell are exposed to the most extreme heat, says Orango Screen Man. Yes, that's why I like to use that ceramic fireboard over the top. And Sally Mafari, yes, it is important to know that if your bell is separate from the combustion chamber, like if it's, after your main stove body, it probably won't get that hot. But if it's the main bell, right, that's holding the riser, it's going to get really hot, way over 250. Top of that bell could easily see 600 or 700 degrees once in a while. It won't get that hot to the outside, but when you start that thing up, it's going to see some of those temps inside. So you need to be real careful with what you use inside that bell. And that's why, like I said, ceramic fiberboard just gives you some leeway and allows you to be a little more cavalier with your materials. Oh, I see. You guys are... thanks for catching me up, Sally Mafar. You guys are debating the material properties of bell materials. I see. Gotcha. So, hey, Jeremiah. Good to see you, man. Any thoughts on a 6-inch wide bell making a sort of wall instead of a cube? A 6-inch wide bell. I see what you're saying. Jeremiah. So, it should work fine. I do think that at some point, your pinch, at some point there's a pinch that's too much, and we talked about it a little bit last year, because you got to keep in mind you got boundary layer on both sides of that wall. So your gases are going to stick to the wall. There's going to be boundaries. There's not going to be much flow. So you're going to end up with like your walls, your boundary layer, and then the actual free gas channel in between the boundary layers. 6 inches might be cutting it close, but that isn't to say that it wouldn't work. And I don't. It's hard for me to say. Again, I think it's going to depend on a lot of things. Probably, namely your chimney and where it is. Like you can force feed that wall bell, as it were, if you put your chimney in the right place. If you're just depending on like passive flow into a dead end, like we sometimes do, it might help to have a little less restriction, because it just might not flow out to the end that well. Because as you pinch it down to 6 inches, that might represent enough restriction that it just doesn't push by itself. If you have a chimney on the other end, and you can pull through, I think you could probably pinch it off quite a bit somewhere in there. So hopefully that helps. But let me know what you do there. I love seeing your experiments and following along with you. So keep me posted. Man, I really got something caught in there. So let's see. Oregon Coast Green Man says insulative value is not always correlated to density mass. Also depends on factors at the molecular level. That's true. So Clint says, I'm going to cask 3-inch insulated concrete to separate the stove from my concrete slab. Can you recommend a recipe? Yeah, Clint. You've got the right idea. I don't think I can really recommend a ratio. I think you're going to want to experiment. Because while I've mixed perlite and vermiculite in concrete mixes, I was using them for cores and things like that, and I haven't done one as a plinth, as it were, as a pedestal for this thing. I would say that I would err probably on the side of letting it be a little more dense than you might otherwise want it to be. You might want it to be really insulative, but I think I'd let it be a little dense and have some strength. So if I were you, I would just cast a couple practice bricks, Clint, and I apologize I don't have better info for you there. I think your material choices are great. I can't even really, it's hard to, I can picture my dry weights. I'd start probably just like 1-to-1, but it's really hard to say how you mix the 1-to-1 dry and then mix the water, but it's hard to say. But I'd say just cast yourself some little test bricks and then see how dense they are. See if you feel like they're structurally sturdy. When you get to the point where they just, they're popping apart and they're too light. But I built my stove on insulated fire bricks, IFB, like kiln bricks, and they're pretty fragile. So I think if you get something that holds itself together marginally, if you could throw it and it doesn't just break into powder, it'd probably be fine for your plinth. So okay, I'm trying to catch up, but I'm leaving you guys to your masonry discussion, and I'm trying to move forward. So because I can't keep up, I found three 18-inch 18 by 24 by 2-inch thick kiln shelves for just $10 at a recycling center. Dang, always learning. That is an awesome deal. You're probably the only person in that recycling center who knew what they were. But how cool! What a score! Perfect size for oven shelves. I mean, just perfect. That's awesome. So, and actually, going back to this question, Sally Mufari asked Positive Aspect about the slate being brittle, and Positive Aspect says it was all broken up already, so he just mixed it with clay and mortar to bind it together. So this is a really good point, is Positive Aspect used that slate, which he knew was really dense and really high mass, and he just used that to bulk up the mass of his cob, right? So he's just mixing it into a spare mortar. He's going to use that in fill in places like inside those concrete cinder blocks where you've got big gaps to fill. Anywhere where he needs fill, he can use that mortar that's enhanced, as it were, with the slate. Time to feed the koi, and what that does is gets him higher density cob fill, higher density mortar. So it's a really simple thing to mix stone into your cob when you have to add volume and you need to fill some holes. And actually, that goes back to like people adding bare pebbles to fill their benches. If you really want to fill your pebble with bare pebbles, I recommend you mix them with cob first and turn it into a monolithic structure, because you'll just get the density of the pebbles and you'll fill the airspace. So let's see. Let's see. Yeah, okay, you guys having a great bell discussion in there. I love it. And a lot of good surface area conversation in there. So Oregon Coast Green Man talks about the narrow bell constrict the flue gases to basically a 2D plane, and a larger area will be required to allow the turbulent flow of flue gases to slow down, stratify. And I think that's exactly right. But again, like I was telling you, Jeremiah, if you build that narrow wall, that I think we're saying the same thing. Oregon Coast Green Man does a better job of explaining why. But you probably shouldn't expect it to act like a true bell, in the sense that it's going to just sort of passively stratify nicely out to all extremities, because it's so pinched off. It's basically, like he says, like a 2D plane of flue gas, or at least a very narrow plane, and it's going to have a hard time flowing through there. Now, like I said, if you can pull it through, that's one thing, but it probably won't. There will be room to stratify in the 8 foot long. It's like there's a lot of volume, but you're just going to have the boundary layers that kind of, stratification works when the flow can just like flow and pour unrestricted, but any amount of back pressure restriction will just make it flow. And I do think that as you get narrow, and I don't know where. I mean, 6 inches might work. Somewhere in there, though, there's a pinch, and it will just kind of. It'll see it as those flue gases come in out of a wide area and they hit that narrow spot. It's going to see it as restriction, because it's hard for it to move the gases out to make way there. It just won't flow very well. So stratification might be tough, but like I said, if you can draw through it with your flue chimney or something, I think it'll work. And even if you don't, stratifying, it's just really a function of time. It's just, you just might need to burn it for a while before it starts to heat all the way up. But I think you should play with it. I think you should try. It's definitely worth a shot. And I think the worst case scenario is that you'll end up doing something like, running your chimney intake down the bottom of that thing to try and encourage your gases to go out and then get sucked back in at the far end. There's ways that you can enhance the flow into tighter areas. So I don't think it's undoable. But like Oregon Coast Green Man says, it is a little bit, for someone like you, experimenting and trying stuff, I think it's a go. If you were just, coming into it cold and wanting to build your first stove, wanting it to work, I would say it probably wouldn't be the best plan for but I think it's worth a try. And you say gas cooling too fast could be an issue, but I say that's always an issue, and that's always just a function of tuning your bell and tuning your exhaust. And that's just the size of the space. So yeah, it could be it could be, but I don't know. I think you'd have success. And keep in mind, we're going to transfer through the bricks as well. It's going to be slow. But what I'm trying to say is it really depends on what your burn style is. If this is a heater that you're burning all day anyways, then I'd say do it, because I think it will heat up that wall eventually. If it's a heater that you want to burn once and let go out and hope to get significant heat out of, it's probably not going to do much in a narrow bell in that one burn cycle. But I think you have enough experience, Jeremiah, with these things to be able to evaluate that. I'd say it's worth a try. I think it's absolutely absolutely worth a shot. So okay, you guys. Well, somehow we ate up an hour. I don't know how we do that. It just seems to fly by. But let's call that a day for today. I've taken enough of your time. I really appreciate all you guys being here with me. It means so much to me, and just have a great time every week doing this with you guys. So thanks so much. If you haven't, go check out my website, walkerstoves.com. Check out the plans. Hit me up. Let me help you build the stove that you dream of. So that's enough for today, I guess. I really appreciate all you guys being here. Yeah, Sally Mafari, Oregon Coast Green Man, Jeremiah. Oh man, I'm not going to be able to do it all. So I'm going to stop right there. If I didn't say your name, I apologize, but I know that you're here, and I really appreciate you being here. All the questions, all the input, all the dialogue. It's really great, you guys. So let's do it again. Let's do it again next week. I'll plan on being here. Send me your photos. Send me your build pics. Send me your questions. We got a lot of cool stuff we can continue to go over. So think of your questions, and you guys get your firewood stacked up and ready to go. It's burning time. So all right, you guys, that's enough for today. I'm gonna hit the outgoing video. I will see you guys next week. Hope you have a great week, and stay warm. I'll see you guys next week. Thanks, you guys. See ya.